Hello. Well, thanks, Chris and Mary, for inviting me. Southwest Wings. It's I
Wonderful.
wish. I mean, I don't want to be in the heat, but I want to see all the birds over there.
Do come over. You're welcome.
Yeah, one of these days.
I hope so. We hope so.
Uh,
There you
so
go.
let me start sharing my screen here and show you what. There we go. Okay. Well, this is a talk that might not be kind of the normal bird watching, birding talk, and hopefully I can get you some sort of different perspectives on a lot of things that relate to birding. But in particular, in the last few years, I've been interested in how our brains work in terms of birding and identification and thinking about birds and all of these things. That it's actually kind of complicated. So really, this is all about putting a lot of things together that maybe if you are a new birder, you might have been contemplating, and if you're sort of a real experienced birder, it might even give you some perspective that you hadn't thought about before. It's how we really do some kind of amazing things when we're out there watching birds and trying to put names on them, and even how birds and nature affect us. Let me start with this though. So when you go out into a natural situation, these are the Santa Cruz Mountains, not too far away from where I live in, between Half Moon Bay and Santa Cruz, California. And there's an interesting study that was done by this professor at Stanford, Gregory Bratman. And he found that there are all sorts of things that can happen in a person's body, chemistry of the body. And there are, chemicals that correlate with things like rumination, broodiness, depression. And if you measure this chemistry, this body chemistry on students, he had a group of students that he would have them walk the streets of Palo Alto, California, and come back and be measured for these things. And he had others go up into natural areas, into the Santa Cruz Mountains, for example, and then be measured for these chemicals. The ones that were in nature had reduction in all of these measures of broodiness, rumination, depression. Nature actually makes you feel good. Nature makes you actually get grounded, and nature makes you really sort of stop having that little inner ticking, sort of worry. Sometimes you're just thinking about other things when you're out there. And one of the things that they found out is that what does it partially is that you begin to contemplate these shapes that are out there in nature, but they have to be the natural shapes. They can't be these false shapes. And you have to see the real deal. Trees, clouds, shorelines, these things make our brain contemplate and make our brain think about things different from what we usually think about. And they give us a sense of calm. So in a sense, this part of this talk is about letting you know that birding and being out in nature is really a healthy thing, and that we need to be out there. But I always tell people that birds are really the gateway drug to nature. It's the way to get yourself out there, because they are the easiest things to look at. They're the ones that are out all over the place. And they're much easier to see than all sorts of other things. Try to find a wild cat, or even, coyotes can be, you see them every once in a while, but you can't see them every day necessarily. So birds really are the thing. And you start thinking about these wonderful creatures, Townsend's warblers, Pomeranian jaegers, all different shapes, different colors, short-eared owl, all of this diversity that's out there that can then get you further into thinking, gosh, I got to get outside. I got to go into this natural world. And actually, when you do, you feel better. This is what I mean about, being the gateway drug to nature. But birding is also one of the most portable hobbies in the world. So imagine the fact that most things that you do that you might be interested in, you can't do everywhere, right? A game of chess, a game of golf, you can't do everywhere, but birding you can do everywhere. You can be the most isolated island on earth. you know, in Rapa Nui, you could be in Antarctica, you could be in all sorts of places, and those places have birds. It's also, I always say it's like a good hot sauce. It also goes well. It's an addition to other things. So you could be playing golf, you could be fishing, you could be a foodie, you could be doing all of these other things, and you add birding to that, and it still works. So it doesn't take away. You can always add a bit of birding to even, going on a walk with your dog, and you have your binoculars, and it just makes things just a little bit more interesting and rich. It is really also an activity that, depending on how you do it and where it takes you and how intensely you sort of travel to go and see birds, it can make you also experience things that you never thought you would see, from volcanoes and lava in Hawaii to great white sharks on the Farallon Islands, to even undescribed new bird species that you might see out there while you're birding. It's really sort of, as you let it take you places, the experiences that you have are amazing. And there's this other aspect of it. So it's not only, looking at natural scenes that make us happy. We have an innate love of living things. If you've ever really thought about how odd it is that we bring plants into houses, we have our orchids, or we have our plants, we have pets. We have all of these things that are actually work and trouble, and but they make us happy. And the reason they make us happy is that connection we have to nature. We cannot have a place that is devoid of living things. We need other living things. And that is a subconscious part of human nature that is also filled by, watching birds. Birding is an activity that makes you take consideration of the day of the year. Each day is different. Each day is a different time of the season. Migrants might be going south, north, moving here, nesting is happening, or winter seasons here, weather happens, and you start paying attention to all of these things that are also ways to connect yourself with a world that's bigger than you. And to me, birding is so incredible too, because you can do it in the most, really kind of low-key way, just watching your backyard house finches and your, goldfinches, to this incredible, intense sort of type A, competitive, chasing the rare birds, or, listing and so forth. There's sort of two extremes, but they're both equally valid and different ways to be a birder. And you can even straddle the middle line and sometimes just, do a bit of this and do a bit of that. It sort of has a place for any kind of personality. But the first step to really getting to know birds is to put a name to them. It's sort of like going to a cocktail party and you have no friends there yet. And then you look and start meeting people, and you find out their stories and you learn their names. And as you get further into it, you know them better and better and better. So, and some of these birds are amazing. Lawrence's goldfinch, it sometimes shows up in Arizona, but it's sort of more of a California bird. To these, this pink-headed warbler over here on this side from Guatemala, I always think it looks like the best watermelon you've ever had when you split it open, that sort of, hoary pink kind of color that a watermelon has. If I would have called it anything, I would have called it watermelon-headed warbler. So there's some fantastic birds, and the first step is really naming them and identifying them. And then for some people, this thing, like trying to figure this out, is a good time. For other people, other birders, this is a nightmare. And again, it's a different part of how you bird and your brain, which part of your brain you're using to sort this kind of, immature gull out, that I would say akin. For me, it's like this. The New York Times crossword puzzle is something that to me is a nightmare. I don't do well with words like this, and it's crazy. Yet other people, they can't wait to get their hands on it, and it's just the most amazing, fun thing. And I think it's exactly sort of the puzzles that we find fun in life that make some people like myself think this is fun. And then for me, this is not fun. But we have diversity in what we like, right? And this talk bases its, sort of part of the premise on a book by this Nobel Prize economics, winner of the Nobel Prize in economics, Daniel Kahneman, and it's called Thinking Fast and Slow. It's a really interesting book. But when I read it, I was thinking, gosh, this is about birding in a sense, and how we bird. And I wanted to sort of put birding in the context of what he was talking about. So I'm going to give you a little test here, and this is not a high stress test, but you could even in the chat put your answer for this, because I don't see your faces, I don't see what's going on, what you're thinking. But I'm going to give you a bird identification quiz. I'm going to show you a photograph, and I want you to identify this bird, okay? And yeah, it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong or whatever, but I'm going to show you the bird and then see if you can put it in the quiz. Let's see here. I got to click on here. All right. Anybody see that? Let's see if anybody goes in the chat there. Oh, pigeon, rock dove, rock pigeon. I've got 3 different names for the same species, and they're all correct. Pigeon, rock dove. And now I want you to contemplate what you just saw. So you saw an image. You saw an image for less than a second, and there are people who, it's probably taken them more time to type this into the chat box than it took them to figure out what it was. So how is that possible? How can it be? And what did you see to identify that bird? Do you actually see a field mark? I don't think you do. I think I would call this, it's the big lie in birding, where the trip leaders, you will see them, if you're out there live with somebody, a local expert, and let's say, well, I mean, for us here in California or in different parts of the West, you might see this black-throated gray warbler, and it might shoot out, from an oak tree some place, and it's a real quick view. And then the leader will say, I just saw a black-throated gray warbler. And then the people trying to learn how to identify that bird will ask them, well, how'd you know that? And I say that the big lie is that usually that trip leader will start using all of the field marks that they learned that this bird has. They'll talk about the stripes on the face, the gray back, all of these things that the bird actually, they know it has, and tell you that that's how they identified it. But that's actually not true. They just knew what it was. They just know from experience without thinking why a bird is what it is. Just like many of you identified that pigeon. I would actually even think that most people don't know what the field marks of a pigeon actually are. You just sort of know a pigeon. You don't need to sort of know the field marks, And it's a really difficult kind of thing to think about, because if you're an expert birder and you tell a new birder, I just know what it is and I don't know how, that's not there's almost no process of how you can get from beginner to that situation of knowing. So we're going to go through a few things of how this works and maybe give some ideas of how it happens. But in the fast and slow, the brain has 2 modes of thinking. It has a fast mode and a slow mode, and they've been termed system 1 and system 2. So system 1 is the fast mode, and it's unconscious. It's without thought. It's automatic, and it's really helpful for repetitive everyday decisions, but it's error prone. It's got its issues. Every so often it makes a mistake. The system 2 is slow, conscious. It takes effort, and then there's more for complex decisions, yet it's more reliable. So when you're looking at this, this Cooper's hawk that's flying over, and some people will, they're seeing the tail and they see this sort of rounded bit. Well, maybe, the wing is straight rather than sort of hooking forward like in the sharp-chin hawk. The sharp-chin hawk has a straight tail more than a rounded tail. Maybe even the the bold white tip might give you an idea. This is a Cooper's hawk, and well, you can't really see the cap, but there's an element there. It looks darker on the top of the head. There's rusty underneath, so it's an adult. You put it all together, that's system 2. You're going through an effort, and conscious way of knowing what, trying to get to the name of this bird. People who are really experienced with these birds, they're using system 1. They automatically know it's a Cooper's hawk without looking at all of those details. They just know. And this is what I call recognition versus identification. So some things that you know really well, like in my backyard, Anna's hummingbirds, I just know boom, 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 they're Anna's hummingbirds. I've seen them a lot. And especially these males with the raspberry heads are really, it's clear cut. I don't think about them very much. I enjoy looking at gulls because they sometimes bring me from my system 1 automatic to system 2 type birding, which is almost like going back to being a beginner birder, and it uses a different aspect of identification that I find fun. It's more of a puzzle. And as you actually spend more and more time with even difficult birds like this Thayer's, Iceland gull, they get eventually put into system 1. They become automatic birds too, which is interesting. So this is one of the reasons why experienced birders are always looking at really ugly birds, and new birders do the right thing and look at all these wonderful, beautiful birds and tanagers and warblers and hummingbirds and all these things. And the experienced birders are looking at flycatchers and, immature sparrows and gulls, because it's getting them to think a little bit more like a beginner birder again. So system 2 is about effort, looking at all these details. Ferruginous hawk, red-tailed hawk. Is the patagial mark there, shape of the wings? Oh, both of them are red-tailed, does it mean it's a red, that kind of thing. Oh, one of them doesn't have the belly band. All of that going through that is the system 2 effortful type of birding. Yet if you've seen a raptor a lot, like an American kestrel, you might just go, American kestrel, I just know it. And you might have not thought in a long time that American kestrel has 2 dark bars on the face, and that the female has sort of rust all in the back and barred and all that. So if you're not thinking those things, you're kind of already recognizing that by system 1 rather than identifying it through system 2 in your brain process. So here's a classic problem that separates how some people think really intuitively and others analytically. Almost everybody gets this problem wrong, and that's not wrong. It's actually to show you how our brain works. So getting it wrong is actually kind of being normal. And most people will say, okay, the baseball bat and the ball both cost $1.10. The bat costs $1. So if the two together, and the one cost the bat cost $1 more than the ball, it must be $1. And then the other one is $1, and then you start putting it all together, and you realize that you start thinking it's $1.10 and 10 cents and $1, but it's actually $1.05 is the answer. And it's like, I never get this even when I think about the answer, because we just do the intuitive, what we think it should be, rather the analytical math, that sorts all this out. And if you think about driving, this is the perfect example of when you were learning how to drive, it was all analytical system 2. And this system 2 is kind of lazy, and it wants to shove a lot of the things it does repetitively to system 1. And it over time does this. So when you were first learning how to drive, you have to pay attention to where the brake pedal was and where things were, and then if you had to shift, boy, that was complicated. And eventually you get to the point where you don't even think about it. You're doing it all automatically, unless you get super tired. If you've ever been really tired and you almost forget, you get in the car and you almost forget how to drive, you have to think for a second, that's your brain switching from your system 1 to 2 for a second. And then when you actually have to think about driving, it's actually really, really scary. It's the perfect example of what happens as a birder. As you get experience, you then do a lot of things more automatically. But this system one that is really powerful does make errors. And here's a white-tailed kite that I saw last winter, actually not too far away from my house. And I showed you the white-tailed kite there. And it's not a white-tailed kite. I thought it was. And I looked at it in my binoculars. It was actually a plastic bag. But my brain put together the pattern, the white and the dark shoulder that it could see, and said, well, there's a kite. And I was wrong. But on the other hand, I kind of was right, because my brain thought it was the right pattern that should be there for a white-tailed kite. So I bet all of you have done this kind of thing, and it's when your system one actually fails you and you see something that is not actually there. I thought it was interesting that this whole thing came up just recently in the Olympics when people were talking about the twisties, right? Gymnast is up in the air and suddenly it's like they don't know how to do what they've been doing forever and ever and ever. They have to think about what they're doing. What has happened there to Simone was that she had everything in system one. It was all automatic. And for a moment, something went on, stress, whatever it might be, that she had to think about what she was doing. And doing gymnastics in system two is not safe. It's not good. You have to be doing it automatic, so you just know where you are, you know how to do it without thinking. So it's actually kind of an interesting thing that this came up just before I was giving this talk. The other thing that happens with birding is that we have this bias, confirmation bias, where we think we love facts that confirm what we already believe to be true. We don't like facts that counter what we believe to be true. And we tend as humans to always go with the facts that make what we already believe true. So you see what I mean? So there's objective facts and what conforms to our beliefs, and that sort of in the middle there is what we think we're seeing, or what we think is happening. And it could be that it's not at all what's happening or what we're seeing. A real great example, I saw this once in the East with a varied thrush that had been reported at a feeder, and a robin came to the back of the feeder and had a shadow right in front of the breast, and it looked like it had the dark V of the varied thrush. I was actually a teenager at the time, but all these birders said, there it is, there it is. They counted it for their lifer and went off, but it was a robin. So they'd actually confirmed what they already wanted to see, and they were all real happy with it, even though that's not actually what was going on. The varied thrush came in later. I hung around for a little bit later. And it's our brain gets tricked. These are three birds that if I didn't know any better, I would have reported to the eBird. This looks to me like a sleeping black oyster catcher, but it's a bit of a rock. It's just a rock. This is like, it looked like an owl, like a little screech owl sitting there. It's a leaf. And this one looked like a teal. I even had it down a teal, not just duck. I thought it was a cinnamon teal. And it's not, it's a bottle that's floating around in the water. And these are all the ways that your system one gets fooled. But fortunately, that's when your system two kicks in eventually and goes, hold on a second, something's wrong here. And it's a fluid kind of communication between the two ways your brain works when you're out in the field. Field guides are what teach us to identify things. We go sort of step by step, identifying things by, comparing. These are geese from Chile. If you look at the ones that are white, that have the barred breast, the upland geese versus Andean geese and so forth, we sort of start comparing and figuring them out. And through repetition, we eventually get to a point that we just know what things are. So when you see a bird like a coot, you start learning them, one of the things that there's more and more evidence that happens is that we have specific neurons in our head that store specific information. So they store kind of what a harlequin duck looks like, and they store what the Sydney Opera House looks like. They might store what your grandmother looks like. and what your grandmother sounds like. And they've been called grandmother neurons. How they work, nobody's really clear, but people think they actually exist. So we load them up almost like a little book on a shelf. And when the right information comes in that is triggered, we say, huh, there's a harlequin duck or an American coot. And thinking about grandmother and birds, and one of the weird things when we also use as a birder, the part of our brain that identifies faces is what we're using to identify birds and recognize birds specifically, the sort of automatic recognition that we do with faces, even of people we've never met in our lives, that we just see in the news or, People magazine, happens with birds. And one of the weirdest things that happened to me a few years ago is that I'd grown up with Canada warblers. Every year I would see Canada warblers, Canada warblers, Canada warblers. Then I moved to the West and I stopped seeing Canada warblers for many years. And I remember being in the winter in Colombia where they spend their non-breeding season and seeing a Canada warbler. And the feeling I had when I saw the Canada warbler was not just of, hey, wow, cool, I haven't seen him in a long time. It felt like I had just gone into a cafe and seen a friend that I had not seen for years. And the feeling, and I almost had like memories come through of almost like a person, because we are using the same parts of our brains to recognize these birds. And we do actually have not, an actual relationship with birds eventually, once you get to know them really well. And that's sort of part of how you eventually recognize birds. But, you need a lot of mental energy to identify birds. And especially when you're new at this, it's actually pretty hard. And it's effort, and it can tire you out. And you have to almost, if you're a beginner birder, you want to get to the point where you're not thinking a lot about how you're identifying things. You're just sort of like moving along saying, okay, here's a red star, here's a this, here's that. But there are other times when all of these things pop up in front of you and it's just exhausting. It's difficult. It's tiring. And you want to be at the point where you're just getting to the point that there's cognitive strain in your brain, that you're actually thinking and kind of contemplating and doing a lot of work, but you don't want to get overwhelmed. The moment you're getting overwhelmed as a new birder, you've got to dial it back, kind of say, okay, I'm just not going to look at flycatchers yet. I'm not going to look at gulls yet. I'm going to look at, redstarts or warblers, other things. And as I get further into this, I will include more things in my repertoire. It's we have selective attention. When we're doing something difficult, we have to concentrate. And if you're trying to learn these shorebirds, short-billed outros, willets, dunlins, it takes a while, and it is hard. So if you're new at this and you're almost getting mental strain, a little bit of that is good, but not too much, because then you actually stop learning. You just start getting into frustration. But if you ever have a chance to look at the basketball and the gorilla, well, you actually have to be given this as some, the best thing is to not know what happens, but I'm going to tell you what happens. There was an experiment where students were told to watch a video of students passing a basketball around and to count the number of passes. And it was something you had to be paying a lot of attention to where the ball was going and counting, and you were doing all of this cognitive stuff. And while it was all happening, somebody walks through in a gorilla outfit through the area. And most people won't see the gorilla walking through because they're paying so much attention to the basketballs being passed around. And that's kind of sometimes also what happens when you're birding and learning some of these difficult birds. You can get to the point where you're paying so much attention, you're almost to these things, you're not seeing other things that are there. And one of the most wonderful things that happens as a birder, once you start just recognizing birds, is that there's almost no mental strain when you go birding, and you just take in nature in a much more fluid way, which is a reason I think it's fun to try to get yourself to a further, identification skill, not just because you'll be able to tell these birds apart, but then you start taking things in more quickly and more fluidly. So it's like, you know, trying to figure out Thayer's goal while you're doing math. It's not doable. Your brain doesn't have that kind of brain space. You have to do one or the other. We have in our brains a way to associate memories with all sorts of things. The associative memory of smell is actually one of the most strongest ones we have. But I like to bring in two examples. When I see clouds like this, since I grew up in the East, when I see these clouds that are right after a cold front, sort of right after warm front, and the cold air comes in and there's these poofy clouds, I always think of hawk migration. And they correlate with certain types of winds and the front having gone through and all that type of thing. I don't see them much around here in California. We don't have this kind of cloud. But I associate the memories and I automatically start looking in the sky for hawks. I remember, this is actually a Eurasian woodcock. It's not an American woodcock. Maybe some of you noticed that. But this, I grew up with American woodcocks, and I remember looking for woodcocks in moist areas in the spring after the snow had thawed. And there's this particular smell to the earth and to the fact that those leaves have been under snow or mud for so long, that the smell, if I smell it, I think of woodcocks. And indeed, if you're keen and trying to see these things, that smell is the smell of woodcocks and rusty blackbirds. And you have these memories, and I would tell you to try to be free to openly associate things in the natural world with birds and events and so forth. And you'll find that they're useful in the future when you're sort of tuned into them. But the way to get to learn birds is repetition. System one, being intuitive, it has this model of the world that sort of represents what is supposed to be there. And repetition creates this for the bird, or seeing ringneck ducks over and over again, knowing where to look, how, when, to be in tune with what's out there. And you only get in tune through repetition. There's a concept of what you see is all there is. We are not rational thinkers. We are, as humans, intuitive. So we can be rational, but most of the things we do are system one. We shortcut. We have preconceived ideas of how the world is. And yet when we bird, all of the books, all of the stuff, the literature that's out there says that we should be birding as rational beings, as seeing all of these field marks and contemplating the bill size and all that. Yet, in fact, what we really do, and when you're experienced at that, you're sort of like a knee-jerk birding. You're just kind of reacting and saying, oh, there's a fulmar, and you almost don't know why. And I would tell you to be free to be a knee-jerk birder, and that is actually a way to think about how you progress as in bird identification, not thinking through every single field mark, but just sort of thinking, well, I think I know what this looks like. And also be aware of the abnormal is out there, and sometimes you assume you're seeing the normal, but you've got to be open to things that are unusual and try to understand what is unusual. You'll find that when rare shorebirds, little stints or this or that, are found, sharp-tailed sandpipers, they're almost always found in an area that has very few shorebirds, and they're right near where the observer is. So it's not like these observers are magically scanning thousands and thousands of shorebirds. They tend to be the things that are right in front of them, because it was like, well, that's an odd one. You can't ignore it when it's that close or in a small group. But this here that you might say, oh, look at that bald eagle, actually isn't a bald eagle. It's a juvenile white-tailed sea eagle. It's got a slightly different tail. But, these are the kinds of things, too, to be open to the difference. You have a model of what's normal, but you also have to have an idea of when something is kind of weird. If you were looking at this and say, that looks like a bald eagle, I guess, but there's something weird about it, that's actually a good feeling to have had, because there was something weird. So, system one is really at the root of a lot of things that we sort of can do wrong, because I showed you all these leaf birds and rock birds. But it's also what's so powerful about our brain, and that it almost always is on the mark. But every so often there's a bit of unreliable aspect to it, and that's where you shift to the system two, and trying to figure out, for example, this funny looking goldfinch here is a very, very weird looking American goldfinch, not a lesser, and I had to go through a lot of mental gymnastics to sort this out, and it was in my backyard, but it was fun. And also our brain fills in information. We don't actually always see objectively what is out there. And I'll tell you this story. I was birding with my university professor. He passed away some years ago, Jim Rising. He wrote a book on field guide to sparrows in North America. He was actually a person that did a lot of work on orioles, all sorts of things. But so he was really, he'd been around, he knew birds. And this was my first time I was in Alaska. And one of the things I wanted to see was a Rosy Finch. At the time, I didn't know that Rosy Finch you would never see on the Denali Highway. I was on the Denali Highway, and my head somehow thought it was all possible. I'd never been there and so forth. And we saw this bird up in the kind of tundra part of that road that was all brown and had this pale area on the back of the head. And these aren't the actual birds. I don't have photographs of this event. And I thought, oh my God, Jim, here's the Rosy Finch, and we put it in the scope and we had it lined up, and he said, oh yeah, it's got all the features. And then that bird flew away, and when it flew, it was impossible not to realize it was a golden eagle. And we we had filled in all of this stuff we had wanted to see, because the bird obviously wasn't as close as we thought. It was quite far away and so forth, but still we'd convinced both of ourselves that we were seeing a Rosy Finch while we were seeing a golden eagle. Your brain can do all sorts of things. You sometimes just have to be open to rechecking yourself, and also seeing when you're being almost emotionally invested in some identification versus really trying to be logical about it. Jim told me never to tell that story again to anybody, but I found it's one of the most amazing stories to tell, and I think he'd enjoy hearing in this context. So how do you get better at all this? It's repetition. You just see lots and lots and lots of birds, images, peregrine falcons from the front, from the back, flying, sitting, going backwards, forwards, in books, on TV, wherever you can see imagery of peregrine falcons. That repetition is going to do it. 10,000 hours. People have found that whether it's classical piano players, tennis players, all these, if you really want to have, expertise. Now, maybe you don't want to get to this level of expertise, but if you really want to be expert at something, it's a lot of hours of repetition. But you can get creative in how you incorporate birds or nature into your life. You can be birding as you go walk your dog. You can be just going to local places where you can spend more time outdoors rather than driving halfway across the state to see birds. Expertise, recognition, prime decision. This is something that's been studied in all sorts of people that have expertise, from chess players to firefighters, and they find that you kind of use partially gut feel and analysis kind of together to get at answers to actions that you need to make. So it's fast, non-conscious, intuitive at times, and sometimes also there's a slower, deliberate, conscious analysis that's going hand in hand. So you're like kind of using your two systems at once. And I think this is the classic way that we eventually bird, especially if it's a difficult identification. To become, and I'm just using expert, but I'm just saying to learn more, let's say, about birds or identification, you have to have an environment that is sufficiently regular to be predictable, and then learn in these opportunities. And later I'll tell you about stock trading and so forth. But the key here is to not ignore common birds. Common birds are those that are going to be regular and predictable. And try to go to a place over and over and over again, a park that is near where you live, a patch, a place that you watch throughout the year, because that regularity, that going back to a place where the song sparrows are breeding, then they're molting, then they're doing this, and then migrants are coming in, and this and that's happening. That patch birding is the regular kind of way that our brain starts adding data, information, and really learning. So when you go to a patch and you're looking at these common birds, when something less common, like a Lincoln sparrow shows up, you will just know that this is something different because you will have spent so much time watching the common birds. Confidence, this is an interesting thing too. CEOs, if they're asked, there was a study done on CEOs of multiple corporations to give an 80% confidence interval of their returns that they were going to have on the S&P 500, basically saying what would be the 80% interval of what was too high and too low for their stock price. And they were given, gave out numbers. They thought, this is what we're going to be at. That's too high. This is where we at too low. 67% of the time they were wrong. And this happens to with, stock traders, all sorts of people that we actually think are expert, but they're really not. If you look at the data, often they're completely wrong, but they have extreme confidence in the information they give you. And we react to confidence in a way that is illogical. And we build trust and belief over people who are confident. One of the amazing things about birding, though, is that some of the experts that have been out there forever, they're data tested and they actually are truly expert. Claudia Wilds, who was a person who passed away some years ago and was doing all this amazing work on identifying terns and gulls and so forth. If Claudia Wilds gave you an opinion on some bird, it really meant something. It was actually much more valuable than the confidence intervals that some of the CEOs of some of the big companies are giving. So it's an interesting thing to contemplate too. But once you become expert, once you know more about this, I think the important thing is to teach others and bring more people from all sorts of realms into the fold of birding. It's really important. I've been involved in a lot of projects in various places from Central and South America, elsewhere. And it's one of the most fun things to do is sort of get more people in the fold and teach them some of the things I've learned over the years. When you get something wrong, we are so odd in birding. Like, you're not ever allowed to get an identification wrong. It's like, your name is mud. But we should actually be really happy when people are making errors, because when you make errors, you're learning. And when you make errors in public and there's a bit of embarrassment that goes on with that, that embarrassment helps you, because the feeling, that kind of little mini trauma, that fight or flight, makes you remember what happened. So when you say, oh, there's a Lincoln sparrow, and that the other person says, actually, no, that's a song sparrow because of this, and you publicly said it was a Lincoln sparrow, that was a good thing, because you put yourself on the spot. And although you might have been wrong, you will learn from that situation much more so than if you had been quiet and said, so I think it's a Lincoln sparrow. Oh, it's not a Lincoln sparrow. Good thing I didn't say a thing, because that will actually, you won't remember that later on. But the real magic is when we get things wrong. And getting things wrong, if your expert birder has gotten more things wrong than the new birder over time, that's how they gained their expertise. A few kind of final thoughts about a few things that I think are interesting. Corporations spend money, millions of dollars, to try to get you to feel something when you see their logos. It's all about emotion. Have you ever thought that we don't use emotion as a way to actually learn what a bird looks like? So when you see a Wilson's warbler, imagine a Wilson's warbler was a logo. You would actually have an emotional component to that image. He looks friendly. He looks happy. He's got a little hat on, and looks about ready to go and do something fun. And now that's silly. You could say that that's a weird way to look at a Wilson's warbler, but the moment you actually start getting emotional component in how you see a bird, the easier it is to recognize it, because you've broken it off from the scientific looking at all the bits of the bird to something much more holistic. that incorporates a larger amount of information in a simpler package that you can understand as a human. So I would say, look at this chickadee from my backyard, chestnut back chickadee. I always say this is chickadee without attitude. Mountain chickadee is chickadee with attitude. Why? All we did is change that stripe in the head, and one of them looks cute and docile, the other one looks aggressive. Now, if the field guide told you, you know, mountain chickadee looks aggressive, or looks mean, you would actually remember that, rather than mountain chickadee is the one with the white supercilium. That doesn't mean anything. But mean looking versus cute looking, that means something to us as humans. So, you know, if you start analyzing birds that you see with these components, that's useful. There are other things way to look at birds too, like these are some, you know, shorebirds, and they could be, you know, really difficult ones maybe, or maybe, you know, the lesser yellowlegs. Perhaps you're in the East, every so often you get to see buff-breasted sandpiper, and then we're always in North America looking for the ruff. Here's a ruff, and the ruff, you know, how are you going to tell it apart? And we're talking, you know, you start looking at bill sizes, leg colors, this and that. I always tell people, always just ruff, you look at the face, and there's the eye, and there's a little stripe behind the eye. That is really unique, and it'll remind you of Cleopatra. If you're seeing the Cleopatra bird, you know it's a ruff. There's no other shorebird that's going to give you the Cleopatra look. And once you know these things, you identify all these birds more simply. And I wonder why we haven't incorporated more of this into, you know, our field guides. Drawing and note taking, you know, again, that's another way to sort of put really complicated information and sample it through, filter it through your system 1, your system 2, all of these things. And the physical act of putting it all on paper and then drawing something, a little sketch, makes you remember that multiple times more than if you had just went through the bird and went through all of the field marks. And the magic of it is that nobody has to see your drawing, and you don't have to ever look at your drawing again. The fact that you made it, that you created that, is already how your brain has helped us store the information. And I use this example because this is a very rare bird I once found while I was walking my dog, a Siberian accentor in Canada. It was the first record for Canada. I've never seen it again in my life. And fortunately, I did keep my bad drawing, and it kind of did, you know, it was helpful in just remembering what I saw. I mentioned this before, you know, so you want to get to the point where you have some cognitive strain. So no strain, no gain, but you don't want to get overwhelmed. You have to find that happy medium where you're moving forward and you're pushing yourself a little bit more, and your brain just starts picking up more information. You want to be having a good time. That's where you don't want to get too far into the overwhelm. The more you are having a good time while you're birding and with other people, the quicker you learn. You really learn best when you're happy and relaxed. You don't learn well when you're under stress and you know, overwhelmed. So you get, you know, those endorphins going, and those 10,000 hours will burn through in no time. I sometimes I thought maybe I shouldn't put this up here, but we are kind of list driven in birding. And a big list does not make you happy. If you have a lot of birds on a list, that doesn't, it might make you happy, but you know what does make you happy is novelty. Seeing new things actually makes you happy, and change and diversity. And all of that is correlated with the big list, but it's not the simple aspect of the list. One of the things that happens when people go and start trying just specifically to add to their list is that there'll be times when you don't see what you're looking for. And that loss, when you haven't found bird X, actually hurts more psychologically than when you do find it. And I found that when that started happening to me, I stopped looking for, I like to find rare birds, I like to see rare birds, but I seldom go and actually go to twitch a rare bird, because the dip hurts more than the gain. And I started feeling like I'm not having fun when I'm doing this. So if you're not having fun, remember that too. You just have to do what's fun. There's a fun aspect of birding for anybody. And big list they do make a lot of people happy, but not everyone. Birds are not a commodity. They're not a simple, like you tick one off and they're all kind of equivalent. There are some birds that are just so amazing that, if you said to me, gosh, I've never seen a stellar seagull, but if I saw a stellar seagull, I'll never be able to see 15 tyrannulates, throughout South America. Those tyrannulates will blend in. You won't remember most of those tyrannulates, but you will remember for the rest of your life a stellar seagull. So birds, there's some birds are more special than others. And so keep all this in mind, and I love gulls. People say, why do you like gulls? Why do you go in? And they bring me sense of calm, zen, kind of a birding as meditation, because I don't always come up with an answer of what anything is. All these hybrids and all these things that people find frustrating, I find some beauty in that not knowing. Maybe it's that aspect of feeling like a beginner, but keep whatever you do in the happy kind of quotient of birding, because there's something out there for everybody. I say to people, be kind of an intentional birder. Focus on the things that make you happy, whatever it is from birding, because there is everything here. You can be type A, adventurous, just like looking at pretty things, backyard birder. You hate details, don't go into details. You just like birds that have red in them, look at birds that have red in them. What is good for you and fun is what you should do. But birding is one of the few things that has everything for essentially everybody. I'm sure of it now, and as more I've been doing this, and there's few things in the world that are this broad. This is perhaps the best hobby on earth. And I'm telling you this because, I've tried some of the other ones. And another thing is, find your group of people that you enjoy being with. Life's too short to bird with unpleasant people. And those people might be fun for other people. They might just not be fun for you, right? You just find who you like to be with. And then again, enjoy and learn from them. You've got to figure out that happy quotient in birding, because this is much too important. Health, wellness, how you feel, connection to nature. None of this should be spoiled by somebody who's not supporting you in your birding. So do you have to be a great birder? No, you don't have to be a great birder. You just have to be out there having a good time. And I always think about this. This is where I live, Half Moon Bay. We have this huge wave that sets up every so often in winter, and the world's best surfers come out. And what I thought was interesting is when I was looking at this through the scope and all these people around me, most of them were surfers, but most of them were never going to go on Mavericks because that's crazy. But they enjoyed watching other people surf Mavericks. And at that moment in time, they were all surfers. It didn't matter if you were weekend surfer, just doing the little waves versus these, professional level surfers. And I feel like as birders, we need to incorporate that kind of feeling too. We can't just say, oh, they're not serious. They're just a backyard birder. That doesn't matter. They're a backyard birder. They're one of us. They're a birder. And then this other person's a world-class lister. That's fine too. We're kind of, all of it is birding. We just have to be, we have to realize that the only way birds are going to have champions out there is to have a huge group of people that are interested in birds. And from the backyard birder to the person finding new species out in the Amazon, it's all what we're supposed to be kind of thinking about. And finally, in terms of health and all this, I like to show this picture. This is San Francisco, and this is from Hawk Hill, the Hawk Watch, looking out over a group of migrant hawks. There are probably some broad-wing hawks in there, which are pretty rare for us here in San Francisco area. And I've been a birder since I was 11 years old. And I remember, talking to people about becoming a biologist and doing all of this. And, and some people would sometimes say, well, that's really great. You've got such a passion, but there's a moment in time, they say, that you're gonna get older and the real world is gonna hit, and you're gonna have to do this or do that, and all of these things that's sort of the real world. gonna bring in. And as I've gotten older, I've thought about the fact that, we think of the city as the real world, but really this is the real world. The real world is nature, and connection to nature is so important. And it's really sort of one of the main reasons I think birding is really one of the most awesome things on earth that people can be doing, to be in this situation. And one day you are going to be going to the doctor and they might give you a prescription for birding. You got to go birding a week because you're stressing out. You're doing too much. You're doing this, you're doing that. You got to go birding. I really do believe that this is coming, that we're going to realize that connection to nature is so important, that it's medicine. So if you're here and you're a birder, boy, you're halfway there, or you're most of the way there, you're fully there. You're a lucky person. So get somebody else into birding, and that's hopefully your good deed for the day. And that's it. Thank you. And please look me up at alvarosadventures.com. We've got trips coming up, Antarctica, Colombia, and 2 spots actually open up for Spain later on this month. If anybody's actually interested and wanted to do it, let me know. But thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Alvaro. I'm looking there at birds and wine. Is it birds and wine, or is it wine and birds?
It's a little bit depending on the day. There's more wine in the evening, more birds in the morning.
Sounds like a great combination.
Yes.
And enough wine, you don't care about the birds you miss. So there you go.
That's right. You just enjoy everything equally.
Well, I very much welcome the day when I can get my next trip to Guatemala on Medicare. That will be really good.
It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen, I'm sure. I mean, we're gonna get to that point, and hopefully people saw something different and unique in all this talk about the brain, and maybe there's some questions too that came up.
Oh, it's a fabulous talk, and I liked your idea of kind of linking emotions and things like to particular birds, because I would challenge anyone not to look at a puffin and smile. I can't help every time I see a puffin, I smile immediately.
Yeah.
There's something about them that just says you have to smile at these birds.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's great. And you're right, that's what birding does. It's on so many levels. It can impact, it can give you enjoyment in very, very many ways, whether it's the challenge of a complicated ID or just seeing something that looks good in a fabulous setting. I think this is what we all enjoy.
Yeah, I do think so. And everybody takes in different parts of it, right? And that's one of the things that I think is so magical about birding, because you can be playing chess, for example, but it's much more limited how many things that can happen there. Or even playing a game of golf or going on a jog. Birding is sort of so broad that there's all sorts of things that are happening and that we can enjoy from it.
Yeah, that's right. I think the one thing we shouldn't ever become is too complacent about it all. When I'm going out with people who are birding relatively for the first time, and they see something really good, and you hear the enjoyment in their voice and you see it in them, and you think, yeah, I've been watching those every day for the last week and I'm not getting that same enjoyment. There's something wrong here. I should still be getting that enjoyment, and it is possible to. But sometimes, you kind of forget it. You have to just roll back a little bit and say, hey, wow, all of these things are so good and so enjoyable.
Yeah, definitely.
It was really great to visit it in this way, and including the emotion aspect of it all. And it just felt like a lot of freedom, the way you were talking about it, a lot of stress lifted off your shoulders to be so perfect and to identify everything in such a specific way, because it's so true that in some ways you just get a feeling that that's something or other. And I just did that yesterday because here Chris is the expert, and I'm learning from him all the time. But I just looked at a bird yesterday and it said, I think it's a peewee or something. And,
It was, yeah.
and then it just was. And I don't even know why I thought it was that, but it just was that because we'd gone through it a number of times before. So
Yeah.
yeah. And we're very blessed to be around nature here so much too. So
yeah, you know, when you do have those magic moments, it's sort of like, okay, you know, you just should feel like, oh, it works, you know, and then
it just works.
almost don't think about it too much, because then it'll happen more and more. You know what I mean? It's sort of, you just let yourself kind of go, oh, cool. I know what that is.
Okay.
Many years ago, I was in Regent's Park in London and walking through the park, and I remember there was a man sitting on the bench and he had his lunch with him, a little packed lunch. He was eating sandwiches, and above him on a branch was an escaped grey parrot. I don't know where it had come from, but it was sitting on the branch above him making a loud noise, and he was just sitting there eating his sandwiches, just totally seemingly unaware of it. And it brought home something. There are people out there who do not know where they are, what's around them, what's happening. There's a lack of awareness because they're focused on some other minutiae in their life. And if they would just open up a little bit more and see things around them, and that's what birding's done to me. I feel I'm way more observant generally about things going on around me. I see so much more than other people. And I point things out and they say, oh, how did you see that? Well, it's because I'm a birder. That's how I saw it.
Yeah. You're paying attention. Yeah, you go through life actually paying attention rather than just sort of, you know, in a daze, with a lot of people do, especially when they're going to work, you know, and kind of like birders, you know, even open up the windows at work and look at the birds outside and stuff. They have other things to do.
Yes.
Absolutely right.
That's what's so great about it.
Yeah,
right.
wonderful. Okay, well, I don't think we have any questions coming through. I think you stunned everyone.
We're stunned.
You absolutely stunned them all. Gosh, well, thank you so much, Alvaro. I would recommend anyone to listen to Alvaro's podcast that he has up with his friend George. There's a series of podcasts. Remind me what it's called again.
It's called Life List, a birding podcast.
That's it, Life List. List. Very, very good fun. I've tuned into a couple of them, just nice exchanges and some nice kind of thinking and thoughts about birds and life and all sorts of things. So well worth listening to. And Alvaro has several publications available, but I particularly recommend the Birds of California book, the field guide in the ABA series for people. Alvaro's field guides, I've always enjoyed since your Chile one, which had details in there. I remember telling you one of the finches, I can't remember, you said sounds like a yellow wagtail, which to me struck home. And the second I heard one, I knew instantly what it was. Just lovely descriptive. Not many people would describe a Chilean's bird using a European species. So I think that's great. So thank you so much. So we're getting some comments in here. Oh yeah, thank you for suggesting new ways to think about getting out and birding, says Lorena. That's great. So yeah, absolutely. And I think most of us here, a lot of us are getting out this week with the Southwest Wings. Many of tuning in here aren't able to at the moment, but I'm sure we'll be getting out, and you've given us a new viewpoint on all of it, Alvaro. It's really, really fantastic. And thank you so much. If you missed the beginning of this talk, it has been recorded. If you want to listen to it again or recommend it to any, we will be putting up a recording of it on the Southwest Wings website. It'll be available there. We'll put it on our YouTube channel. So it'll be available for watching.
We have a lot of comments saying great presentation. Thank you so much. Great talk. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
And I believe in the UK, we don't call it rock pigeon, we call it flying rat. Anyway.
Okay.
But you knew what it was.
Yeah, absolutely.
There you go.
So tomorrow we have a talk at 11 a.m. from Gillian Cowles, she's the spider expert, but she'll be looking at partnerships between plants and insects, interactions between them. It's going to be a very interesting talk. So please join us for that tomorrow at 11 a.m. Okay. Well,
Well,
once-
thank you so much.
it's lovely. I hope to see you on a boat somewhere soon, Alvaro.
Right.
That'd be so good.
Yeah.
I'll let you know
We'll see
when
you.
I'm
Thanks.
coming over your
Or
way.
you come out this way for sure.
And please do let me know, and you must come and stay, and we'll show you some of our lovely birds.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and for inviting me to talk to your gang of folks.
Yeah.
And enjoy the rest of the week.
Thank you.
All right.
All right. Bye-bye.
Okay.
We're gonna,
Bye.
bye for now. We're gonna wrap
Bye.
it up, folks. So we'll see you around out there. Take care.
Yeah.
Be well.
Bye.
Bye-bye.